Hello, Dino here, and welcome to the Beginner's Guide to Generative AI. This is going to be relatively quick. It's quite a long deck, but I'll try and do it quickly. You don't need to know who I am. I used to work at Sky. That's me in the Innovation Centre wearing a funky shirt. I like shirts. What we'll cover in the session, I'll do you a quick intro to show you what it is, what other companies are doing with it, some words you need to know to have productive conversations, who the leaders are, the main watch out and issues, some useful examples. I did this originally for a hospitality and website company, sort of relevant. It's better than nothing. Slightly weird examples might be more interesting, and also some words of wisdom. Quick note is this is oversimplified. If you're an expert, you're going to wince at some of this, but it's good enough if you're a beginner. And also it's a fast moving topic. So hold on to your boots, we're moving. But also some of this has been superseded already. The really simple intro basically says, look, AI can improve customer experiences. It can improve customer productivity. Of course it can. You need to embrace this opportunity. It's not going anywhere, but you need to do it in a thoughtful and responsible way. Some basic, sensible news. I'll give you some watch outs at the end as well, and words of wisdom. However, the basics of AI basically said, look, it's a moving target. In the 1970s, a pocket calculator was seen as intelligent. And as we then understood it, it was just computers doing computery stuff. Generative AI is already starting to be computers doing computery stuff. It is not sentient. It doesn't think particularly. It is just computers doing computery stuff. In a couple of years' time, that's exactly how we think about it. Just be aware this is not a new god. Okay, AI. Be clear what you're talking about when you're talking about AI. It is a large topic. Artificial intelligence is a wide topic. Machine learning is nested within that, and that's when you start to use that to understand patterns and make predictions. And then nested within machine learning is generative AI. So that's the use of machine learning, and you can then start to do things that sort of look like they're being created. So I'll use air quotes around that as well, but just be careful when you use AI. It means a huge amount of things. Why are we talking about it? ChatGPT is pretty much why we're talking about it, but it's been around since the 1950s. Huge steps started happening about 2015, 2017, and now we have ChatGPT. It was really nerdy. I had to then install a huge amount of weird stuff, and now you can just go on there onto a free website and use it yourself. Remarkable. That's why we're all talking about it over the last 2 years. What sorts of things can it generate? You probably know this sort of stuff anyway. Chatbots, it can write scripts, it can do summarizing, it can do code, it can do speech, it can do images and videos, synthetic data, 3D models, and also it can then generate insight from relatively unstructured data as well. So really interesting for looking at call center data and scripts and things like that. However, how does it actually work? If you go onto your phone and you start a text conversation with yourself and just keep prodding that next predictive button in the middle, or it doesn't matter whether you choose the left or the right version of it, it will make a sentence. It's just trying to use the next most probable word in a sentence. Everybody, if you do this next to somebody else, will have a different version of that sentence. Your loved one, your sister, your brother will all have a different version of that sentence because it knows the words that you use on your phone. So it's just creating a sentence with the most probable word next based on what you've done before. That's pretty much how AI works. So you've already been using it on your phone. If you need a little bit more detail, let's take a nursery rhyme and show you how ChatGPT uses patterns to come out with the answer. Let's take this poem or nursery rhyme. Hickory dickory dock, the mouse ran up the clock struck one, the mouse ran down, hickory dickory dock. So this is how an AI would look at that. It would say, right, okay, let's look for patterns. Hickory dickory dock, that happens twice. The mouse ran, that happens twice. The clock and the clock, but if it's at the beginning of a sentence, it seems to have one of those funny little T-bar things and has a really curly one if it's at the end of a sentence. That's interesting. The mouse ran up and the mouse ran down. There's two things there. And the only thing that's unique is struck one. Interesting. Now let's assume it can understand what a question actually is. And you said, what did the mouse do? It'll say, well, the mouse ran. I know that. But there's two things, up and down. And I know humans, if there's two things, they put the word and in between things. So I'll do that. I'll just add an and because I've seen that elsewhere. And it's the clock. That's what it does. It runs up and down the clock, but it's at the end of a sentence. So I'll use that little curly T. I don't know what a T is, but I'll use it anyway. And I also know that humans put little dots at the end of sentences when they're done. So what did the mouse do? The mouse ran up and down the clock. And we all think it's sentient and amazing, but all it's doing is it's looking for patterns and predicting what the next phrase or the next word will be based on what it's seen before. That's how AI works. Large language models are really what we're talking about here. So large language model, it is just lots of stuff get ingested, lots of data, and it figures out how to connect the concepts and what we call tokens. It just takes, like, this word here is connected to that word there. I'll take any data I get, and the more and more data I get, the more I start to see the correlation between things. I don't know what it means, but I just know it's over there and it's close to that, or it's far away from that. It then spits out lots of AI models, but basically your large language model data is based on just scraping everything from the internet. If you have data right now, you're in a very valuable place. But there you go. Large language models are just ingested huge amounts of text and data, and they try and figure out how it all connects together. This is what an embedding and a vector is. So imagine a warehouse full of floating concepts. An apple is floating right in front of you, and next to the apple is floating lots of fruit, because an apple is quite close to fruit. The vector, as we say, to other apples, a green apple, for instance, is actually quite strong. However, the vector to a banana past that, it's not really that related to an apple, but it's close. The color red, it's a red apple. So colors are quite close as well, for instance, but the color black is quite far away because you don't really get black apples. Yeah, oranges and apples are quite close in lots of nursery rhymes, for instance. And also you've got juice. So juice and liquids are quite close to each other. Drinks are very close to those as well, but coffee's further away because that's a hot drink. So you get these concepts that are closer or further away from other things in this big space. That is what's called an embedding. Otherwise known, in that space is the latent space. It's where things happen. So when you say apple, it knows that apple is a fruit, and possibly you might be talking about juice, and it might be talking about colors. So if your question was, what color is this apple? It knows probably head towards the colors, and the strongest one will be red, for instance. So the apple is red. That's how it decides what to say next, because its vector is stronger for what you're trying to do. That is embeddings and vectors. The embedding is really the database. It's hard to describe other than a warehouse with stuff floating in it. A prompt, you've all used a prompt. Just be aware that there are good prompts. There's a basic prompt, there's a better prompt because you add a little bit more detail to it. There may be some keywords that you know, and that's called prompt engineering. You can get better results if you use better prompts. You can also use AI to help you write a better prompt. It will be very happy to give you a very good prompt. Let's talk about weights and biases. So when you say, like, what was the next word it's going to come up with, if you then said, right, how's it going to decide that? Where's that apple in its little thing? How's it going to choose which one of those things it's going to go down, and which vector is it going to choose? Well, those are the weights and biases. So the apple weight that goes down the vector is a different way, and the biases that it might have, it's going to go that way or that way. So if you ask of it, what is a cat? And you then said, right, okay, what are the weights and biases? And it will say, well, I'm going to ping through this neural network. I'm going to go this way, that way, this way, that way. And I'm going to choose you at the end of it. A cat is an animal. Great. If you then had a thing called temperature, it just basically says, like, when you actually go through each node and you decide whether you go left or right and choose a different vector here and there as you go through, a different temperature setting will say, how random are you going to be? How spicy are you going to do? Are you going to go on a funny little angle over here? So you might say temperature 1, total temperature, what is a cat? And it will come out with Dr. Seuss. And if you say temperature 0, very, very flat, very boring, it'll say a cat is an animal. So this is akin to creativity. The more temperature you put in, the more it traverses those weights and biases in a crazy way. So there you go. That's weights, biases, and temperature. You can literally tell the AI to use a temperature of 1 or 0, and it will take that on board and make it a little bit more interesting. So ChatGPT, it is generative. It is pre-trained on all that data, and it uses a transformer model to get from A to B. That's what ChatGPT stands for, generative pre-trained transformer. Now you know. So if you pull all that together, what are other companies actually doing with it? Well, you got Adobe. They have actually got this, it's been embedded in their Adobe suite for a long time. It's called Firefly, and they just keep coming up with loads of stuff. But you can now use it in production ready hardware and software. You know that already. CNET, this is an old example. They're creating news. Obviously Sky and Comcast make news as well. Not without its backlash, and obviously being labeled is very important as well. Also, if you're creating music, you can create your own music. I create music, I have keyboards. However, I can create better music or more different music I can not normally do using, it's all, by the way, it's trained on probably copyrighted music, very sketchy area, but you can do that. Spotify is live translating all of its content, for instance, in the voice of the author, which is really interesting, getting to a brand new audience, expanding their range. Also, You look at this, this is actually part of the Google Ad Suite. This is their Performance Max platform. If you are programmatic media, then you can actually just upload all your bits and bobs. You can tell it what advert you want. And if it says, like, I'd like to put a cat in it, it will put the cat in it. It will then create the copy for you. You can actually have a conversation with it and you can get to an advert at the end of it. You can now sort of do this just using Claude and ChatGPT, quite frankly. However, it's already built into Google's Performance Max platform as well. Fund managers are using it to predict data as well and run huge amounts of correlations with, is it going to go this way? Is it going to go that way? You can use all of that information just to come up with essentially a correlation up or down and which way you're going to use it. So just nerds are using it essentially. Software engineers are creating text, code. There's a whole thing called vibe coding. You don't even know how to use code these days. As long as you know what you want to achieve, you can actually then create code. The code, as far as I've seen, is a little bit scruffy. And it could just go absolutely upside down straight away. However, it's really interesting. If you don't know how to code, but you need to code, it's making that really accessible for lots of people. Creative agencies are also using it to generate. So this is a relatively old example, but you can see where that's going. But also, where's all the big money going? Well, AI assistants and human machine interfaces, as it's called, social media and marketing, and also, photo and video editing tools, as we've seen from Adobe. So lots of places where it's going: code completion, voice synthesis and cloning, lots of money going into AI. If you don't have AI in your end of year call for your financial startup, then you're probably not going to get investment in the next year. So some practical things. There are some companies out there who are using it. So Lilly, who are a healthcare company, they say actually they're using, or they've actually saved 1.4 million hours of human activity by using it, and they've actually redirected those to actually be more productive. Walmart, for instance, they said their growth in their e-commerce profits are up by 21%, just because it's a lot cleaner. They've actually got a better workflow. Dynarod, the reduction in customer calls because they've got attached to their agents, for instance, 85% reduction in time to schedule interviews for MasterCard, and so on and so forth. You get the idea. There are real companies who have put it in a big level rather than just tinkering away with prompts. So it is being embedded in big companies. Whether you should invest very deeply right now because it's fast moving is a whole different question. What are some words you need to know? Diffusion models. So we've talked about large language model. How do you actually make pictures? We haven't really talked about that so far. That's where diffusion models come into them. So you can make lots of things with diffusion models, but images are the main thing. So for instance, if you fed it lots of pictures of dogs, what it would then do is it would take each one of those pictures of a dog and it would turn it into white noise. Every pixel, step by step by step by step, it will turn it into white noise, and it learns how to do that. And what it then creates is what's called this latent space. It understands how to take a picture of a dog and turn it into white noise. If you then get that white noise and just jiggle it around a little bit and you say, can you just reverse that process? Well, yes, I can, but the dog's going to be different. You go, that's exactly what I want. And it brings it back the opposite way and it creates a different dog. And if you know which pixels to monkey about with, then it creates a different piece of content. So diffusion models, literally as it says, is about diffusing images down to noise and bringing it back out of that noise and a different one. And what you do in that latent space will dictate what you actually get in the end of it. It's super interesting. Multimodal is a word you need to know, which basically just means different modes of generation. You've got text, images, charts, video, data. These are all different modes. So a lot of the big companies are trying to go multimodal. Maybe 2 years ago, you have lots of separate companies all doing monomodal, or even just chat, which was monomodal, but now we're doing multimodal. So always look for a multimodal company if you can. Training cutoffs, just be aware that these big models, when they're trained, that warehouse in the sky with lots of apples in it, basically you've got to set each one of those vectors. And as soon as you've got it set and you're really cool and you think it's actually going to work, you ship it, and that's how it is. So ChatGPT 4, 5, and we've obviously moved on from this, but you can see there is a cutoff. So you need to be aware that if you ask of it a fact that might be above or ahead of its cutoff, it might not know the answers to that. Tokens are the things that it actually uses. When I said it cuts up into words like hickory dickory dock, it doesn't necessarily use entire words. It uses tokens. So if the word to happens a lot, so it might as well say, and Ken doesn't happen a lot. So rather than, and token doesn't happen a lot. So what it'll actually do is go, well, do you know what? I'll just use the word to. So I'll encode to and then Ken. So to I can use a load of times, and it might be a really useful token to have. But if you look at that number there, like 1029304, no, actually what it does is it puts that into tokens. It obviously sees bracket 10 quite a lot, so that's one token. And this is how an AI works. So each one of the things, the bits it processes, is actually a token. So If you look at that, there might be 266 characters, there might be 32 words, but there actually, as far as an AI is concerned, there are 64 tokens. And you don't really have any say on how it chunks up some text into tokens. You just need to know that, the way it's done it, it has found the most efficient way of taking a piece of text. So interesting. That's what tokens are. Agents are the biggest, latest thing. So instead of just having something that predicts one thing after another, what an agent does is actually it says, right, we've got lots of different things we need to do. Let's actually get to a point where we've got an expert in that, an expert in that, an expert in that, and we'll then come together and we'll reason so that we can actually then figure out what the global answer is, rather than just doing this kind of formulate what's the next. So if you have an agent that's trained to be a great designer, an agent that's is a statistician, you've got an agent that is trained to be a, I don't know, insight miner, you put them all together and you say, like, I need you to figure this out. And they will go and do their own reasoning. They will go and do their own kind of workflow to get to the answer better. So that's the new way of doing AI. LoRa's interesting. You think, how do I get a consistent style every time I go to ChatGPT? It seems to be different every time I do an image, for instance. Well, that's what a LoRa is. So it is a way of training based on input data. So if you've got training images, you then create a LoRa. It takes probably a couple of hours to do on your laptop. This is dead easy to do. It will then save a file onto your desktop. This is your LoRa. You can then use that LoRa. You give it a special name, in which case I've called it Lil Dog, for instance. And if I then says, okay, Lil Dog in the Acropolis, or Lil Dog in a doghouse or in a bucket, it will use my training LoRa to then style my final images. So it's really important for brands to understand what a LoRa is to train their content within their own model. You can have your own models. AGI is the big thing. This is artificial general intelligence. This is where we're all going theoretically, which is where AIs actually know as much as humans do. Artificial general intelligence. Now, depending on what test you use, it's either we're really close or actually there's been a new test that just says like we're miles away. So this test you're seeing on the right-hand side, the dots were where all the models were getting towards human intelligence at the top. You see they were making great progress. The new test is the triangles at the bottom, and it's actually miles away. So we're not getting anywhere near general human intelligence. Some of the quizzes it does down at the bottom, these are really difficult for AIs to do, but very easy for humans to do. So new tests give you a different perspective on that, but that is AGI. MCPs are model context protocols. Again, really, I don't know who comes up with these phrases, but MCP is really interesting in that it sits in between your AI, your text model, and a piece of software. This is Blender, for instance, and you have a Blender MCP, and all it does is you start a server, and it then says, right, as I'm going in this case, Claude, I'm typing away what I want. It then fires that through into Blender, and it generates it using an interface, which is called an MCP. It understands how the software works, and that allows you to control it with a text model. That's what an MCP is. Not everything has an MCP. Not everything will allow an MCP, but Blender is a good example. Unity has one, for instance. So look out for MCPs. They are making more tools available to AI. Talking about being available to AI, this is RAG, this is Retrieval Augmented Generation. So all the cool kids are talking about. So when I told you about that warehouse with the apples in it, then what if there's something else in there, or even the cutoff? You need something else because you've got your own database that you need to go in there, but you don't know how to use that with ChatGPT. So you have a Retrieval Augmented Generation, which basically says, right, okay, give me a golf book title that sounds like a bestseller. It'll go, okay, the AI will say, well, how about golf is great? You go, yeah, could you just look at what actual books are there at the moment? So yes, okay, I will go out to the internet, I will retrieve and augment the process, and they'll say, well, Harry Potter's still doing well, so what about tweak the answer to, how about Harry Potter? What about that? You go, well, that's better. That's interesting. So what it's done is it's retrieved new information from external, and it could be your own data or the internet, and that's what Retrieval Augmented Generation is. Here's a whole bunch of words. Some of them I've talked about: temperature. I've not talked about attention, for instance, but pause the video, have a look at these if you really want to. These are not all the words, but there's some good ones. Who are the leaders in this? This has changed all the time, but everybody's got one. So they're like noses. So OpenAI, they've got a large language model, they've got their chat model, they've got images, Google have got one, IBM have got one, DeepSeek have got one, for instance. So they've got their, you go, what's their image generation? It's called Janus. Great. Awesome. You've got Claude from, you've got also lots of Chinese models coming up as well. So Lots of big companies are trying to get into this world at the moment, but these are some of the big ones. You probably find that Amazon, you probably won't see much of it, but it's still there in the background. There are lots of small companies doing it as well. So lots of those models, when I talked about multimodal, these were the things that were monomodal. So if you want a logo generation or coding or self-care or things like that, they are usually monomodal, but they're doing it in a brilliant way. So you might find that there's actually a mode for you in one of those companies. So everybody's going to multimodal, just to talk about that. Gemini, for instance, OpenAI, Grok, from X, for instance, they're all multimodal. They can do code, they can do images, they can do all sorts of things. So that's where everything's going right now. So some of the things you also need to know as well. So ChatGPT, obviously you've seen that before, don't need to go into that too much, but just be aware there are different models that you can use, and you can choose that at the top. Claude is a more, let's just say, aligned with human principles, I think is where they call it. So they've got deals with training data. It's multimodal to a point. It still can't do images. However, it's really, really interesting. A lot of people these days are using Claude. So if you're a little bit maybe morally inclined, then Claude is probably the one to go for. On the opposite spectrum is Grok. This is trained on data from X, otherwise known as Twitter. So you can just imagine some of the things. It's got a lot of those, let's just say the temperature is turned up on a lot of the responses on it. So you get some quite spicy stuff out of it. Not useful for many things, but for instance, if you want it to write a document format for a code overview, it's really good at that. So you need to pick and choose what you use it for. Microsoft Copilot, if you do have this turned on in your organization, then it is basically embedded into all of the Microsoft suite. It's now available to consumers as well. You just got to tick a box essentially, but it knows about all of your software. It knows about what you've been doing in it. So you can ask of it smart questions, say, hey, could you give me a summary of this document? When I had that call the other day in Teams, who was the person that came up with the summary and what was the summary? You can do that sort of thing. That's Copilot. Midjourney is still waiting to really make its move back into somewhere useful to use it, but essentially what you kind of have to use Discord, and if you don't really use Discord, it's a bit weird, and it's also expensive as well. So Midjourney, however, is a really good image generator, and they are pretty much the leading edge of it, although OpenAI have just come up with a new model. However, Midjourney, if you want really cool, it's usually parts of a work process. You might actually come up with a concept, you might then render it or come up with a Midjourney. You might then go into Runway, for instance, to then animate it. So it's usually parts, here you go, this is Runway. So imagine those meerkats have been generated in Midjourney because it's a really good at generating images. And you can use, for instance, the motion brushes to add very subtle motion to things using Runway ML. ML is machine learning, by the way. So Runway ML is really good for video. So if you ever want to do little bits of video, that's it. Sora, for instance, is OpenAI's video generation model. It's not really that brilliant. It was supposed to, they didn't actually release it because it was going to, stop the world on its axis, but it didn't. There are better ones out there at the moment, but there you go. So there are video generation models out there. You need to know about those. Apple Intelligence as well. It's having a little bit of a meltdown of late. However, we're starting to see them put into hardware, and Apple typically always wait on the wings and then jump in when they know what they're doing. In this case, not so sure, but it's still in there. Alexa as well, so Alexa Plus is actually what it's now called. So if you have an Alexa and you're in America, then you've probably just had the email that you need to sign up to the new terms and conditions. However, what they're doing is they're saying Alexa now needs to listen to everything. It can then use its voice to text and text to voice and come up with much better solutions because it's now using AI back behind the scenes. 11 Labs is all about voice generation. It's really, really interesting. It can mimic voices, but also it can generate voices as well. Really useful for things like podcast or voiceovers as well. The intonation is amazing. So there's some watch outs and issues. So you need to look out for bias. You don't know how the data has been trained. Those little dots in the middle of the air, you don't know quite what the vectors are, for instance. Personal data as well. Have they trained it on data that has been copyrighted or stolen, for instance? And do not put proprietary data in there as well, because they might leak out, for instance. Business confidentiality is obviously the thing that follows on from that. So if you've got business secrets, do not put them into a public one. If you're not paying for your AI and you don't know where the switches are to make it private and in a sandbox, you shouldn't be putting anything business confidential in there. Fake content, it will make stuff up, and I'll talk about that shortly. The ethics of using AI, should you be using it? There are brands out there that do not want you to use AI. And likewise, if anything, we're seeing some fashion brands at the moment using AI generated models, not without people giving a little bit of a backlash to that as well. IP rights, do you actually own what is actually generated? can you guarantee that it wasn't trained on copyrighted information? And then there is some sort of echo of that somebody's going to come after you for, but do you really own what it actually generates? Generally speaking, there is no copyright to music and the US in the US, around the world as well, and security as well. If you attach one of these things to your internal tech systems, you don't know really what it's doing because they work in a very different way. Basic guidance is never share any information in a public AI platform that you wouldn't feel comfortable writing on a billboard. It's generally good. It's not good at a bunch of things as well, just because of the way it works. Everything is about prediction. So complex maths, it doesn't actually do maths using things like calculators and whatnot. It actually predicts what might be next. So, if 2 and 2, somebody says 2 and 2 equals 4, that's great. But somebody also said, well, they put 2 and 2 together and got 6. That is a saying that might be ingested into the learning database, and sometimes it might just say when 2 and 2, it says it's 6. So it's a really weird way of doing it. It cannot come up with original ideas. It only can mush things together that it's known about before. So original ideas, sorry about that, it cannot do those as well. Long-term planning is not really great at keeping long-term. So the amount of tokens it can keep in its memory is relatively restricted. So keeping tabs of the conversation as it progresses over months is still a little bit far away. Factual accuracy, as I said, it will always try to predict what comes next. It has got a little bit of a bias to try and finish the sentence. Once it's got momentum to a sentence, it wants to finish it. Even if it doesn't know how to finish it, it will start grasping at things and start putting things in their place. It will literally start making stuff up. Fairness, it doesn't really understand about contextual fairness as well. So if two people are in a room and one of them has had something stolen and the other one needs punishing and the other one, it doesn't understand how that works. So, contextual fairness is not something it does. And also physical consequences as well. If you crack an egg onto your keyboard, it doesn't really understand what's going on there. Whereas you and I would jump up immediately and start swinging it around and shaking it and going for tissues. It doesn't understand the physical consequences. It can also only generate what it's seen before. And this is me trying to generate a pineapple upside down. It will not do it. So that's me actually flipping it on the left-hand side. If you ask it for everything else, it will not do it. So, it says, here's an image of an upside down pineapple. Its leaves are at the bottom, placed inside a shopping basket. It's not. It cannot do an upside down pineapple for some reason, because it's not actually been trained on any pineapples upside down. There are lots and lots of examples of this, but just be aware that it can only generate what it's seen before, a bit like dreams. Hallucinations are a thing. It will try and make up stuff. So, it knows that there's a hand at the end of a wrist, so it just keeps doing this hand-wrist sausage thing. Generalized responses. If you think you've got a super power because you've got generative AI, it's only as good as what everybody else is typing in as well. They'll get the same responses, give or take, with a bit of temperature here and there. So what was it? The Incredible said, Syndrome said, if everybody's super, then nobody is. That's exactly it. You got access to a superpower, use it wisely. And also context is a really important thing. Probably one of the words I should have introduced earlier, but how much context does it have about the situation you are talking about? Is a really good example here. Dolly Parton. It knows a lot about Dolly Parton. There's a huge amount written about Dolly Parton, music and everything. However, if you are a filmographer or you're doing films and you want a dolly shot, that is far less important as far as a large language model is concerned. And if you ask, say, generate me in Midjourney a film set and dolly in, it will literally put Dolly Parton in there because it knows more about Dolly Parton than it does about films. There you go. Tokenization is all about how it can cause errors. So as you saw before, basically it caused errors because of the tokens it was using. It split it up in different ways. And there was a classic, which is how many R's are there in the word strawberry? And everybody got a little bit concerned quite a while for the fact that it couldn't actually figure this out. So there are 3 R's in strawberry. Okay, interesting. And then if you ask it, well, how many R's in strawberry? There were 2 R's in strawberry. Okay, well, that's correct. So how do you say 3? Then, well, the reason it's doing that, and you can see you can get 3 again here, the reason that is because of the tokens, and that's where the errors start to creep in. So strawberry is 3 tokens, STR, A double, and berry. Berry happens a lot. So if you then look at strawberry and then space strawberry, those are 2 different tokens it's using, and therefore you might actually get a different response from it. So just be aware that tokenization can actually cause errors in your responses. So it's not a genius thing. You have to really keep your wits about you. Also, if you try to then stop things happening, especially in image generators, you go in there and you start to fiddle with some of those weights and biases to make sure that people don't generate what you shouldn't generate, then you can get some really weird results. So this was woman lying on grass, and this was for a while just obsessing everybody, because somebody had gone into Stable Diffusion 3, brand new model, and said, like, you shouldn't get women lying on grass because some of them are inappropriate. So what we'll do is we'll go in there and we'll fiddle with those nodes so that it cannot be generated. And all it really did is it generated what you can see before you. It just went really, really weird. So moderation can lead to unpredictable results. And there's also weird hacks as well. So these are sometimes called jailbreaks. We're not quite sure how these work, but for instance, if you told it, how do you make a bomb? It will say, I can't tell you. However, if you said, look, what is this ASCII text, BOMB, and can you make one? It's so obsessed with trying to figure out what BOMB is. It goes, oh, it's the word bomb. Yeah, I'll tell you how to make one. You can hoodwink it into actually glossing over the fact that it shouldn't actually be telling you this. So there's a lot of these hacks in there. Nobody's quite sure how they work, but they're there. Is my data safe in one of these models? Well, if you're using it free, is it going to be training their model? Well, if it's free, it probably is. If you're using an enterprise version, then maybe, depending on how the settings have been set. So just make sure that if you're putting anything to a large language model, just assume it is being trained somewhere, unless you really know what the settings are behind the backgrounds. Regulatory landscape is evolving all the time, so watch this space. It's either being banned or it's being opened up. Obviously, the UK government are doing some fairly funky things right now. So when is it important to use? So it's about accuracy and frequency, really. So if something is really critical, its accuracy, you don't do it very often and get a human to do it. There's no point doing an AI. It's a little bit like automation. If it's really critical and it happens a lot, then yeah, use an AI, but also a human has to have oversight over that. If it's not particularly accurate, or for instance, it maybe happens a lot of times, or maybe an AI is used for that, but you need to keep an eye on it whichever way you do it. So just be aware that if it's accuracy that you really need, get a human involved. And also if it's public, then you really need to be very careful showing anything to the public that hasn't gone through a human. Sensible guidelines. Don't enter any confidential information. Get legal sign-off before using it in production. That might not be legally possible. Use human oversight all the time. Even in the process itself. Continuously improve and monitor. Like once you've done it and it's shipped, it's going to have to go again because it will improve. And have an AI policy. Obviously, Sky, Comcast have an AI policy. You need to be very aware of what that is. If you're creating things and you don't know what your policy is, you might be going against the policy. So how is this useful? And again, this was for a website and a hospitality company, but you can do location discovery, you could tailor activity recommendations, multi-language support for the website, audio guides on demand, food supply chain and waste optimization. There's lots of things you can do. So for instance, if you then said, right, Gemini Gems, let's talk about some of the ways you can use it practically. Gemini Gems, there's also GPTs. You can actually create your own prompts that you can bolt together and they can do their own thing. Saves you rewriting prompts all the time. When you come up with a good prompt, you can just keep using it. Those are Gemini Gems. Adobe Firefly, as I say, it's in lots of things, even After Effects. So for instance, if you wanted to change this in your After Effects or you wanted to extend a clip, it will do that for you. So it's just in the production pipeline. Otter is really useful, and there's plenty of these right now. How do you get effective meeting time? This is built into, as I say, Copilot, for instance, in Microsoft Office. But if you're not, then Otter will do that for you. It will summarize, it will take notes, it will do all sorts of things. Jasper is good for copywriting. Yes, you can generate copy in the large language models, especially the multimodal ones as well. However, Jasper has a good interface. If you are a copywriter, it allows you to change things and it will automatically change that, and all the inferences will change throughout the rest of the text. It's got a good UI essentially. Reviews, again, this was for a website company that does reviews, but you've got Review AI. It can actually look at your reviews. If one comes in, it knows how to answer that review immediately because there is some benefit to answering quickly. Shopify Sidekick is a good example. So if you have a website, you can actually now have a Copilot, a Sidekick. And if it then said, look, what should I put on offer? It knows what your sales are doing. It knows how to change your website. You can have a conversation with it and it will then put stuff on your front page. It will send out an email and it will tell you how or what to do. Stock as well, this is really interesting. You can actually take all of your data. You can then say, okay, if I ran this a million different ways, how is this going to work? And likewise, if I've got lots of data, I can run it through this and I can say, interrogate this data and show me the intelligence in this data, show me what I need to know. So you don't need to actually code this anymore. You don't need to actually go into SQL or Python or anything like that. It will do it for you. You can find the anomalies in there. Screenshots code is just sort of a slightly interesting thing. does a good job. If you take what looks like YouTube and say, could you just generate that? It'll say, yeah, I'll scan that, and I will then create the HTML, the CSS, the JavaScript to create that as well. A bit bonkers. Hey Jen, this is me in my old house. And this is an avatar. It took, I think, 30 seconds of video to create this, and it sounds broadly like me, which is kind of interesting. Tastewise looks at, scours all of the internet for trends, what people are doing, and it then figures out what the next level could be. What are the next trends that haven't taken fire yet, and what should you try and do? GitHub Copilot, if you're a coder, then you'll know about this one already, but essentially it allows you to create code, and it allows you to then ask questions of it and also generate the code itself. It's seen lots of other pieces of code like you are about to type, and therefore it can do that. Even if you want to refactor or comment your code, it's useful for that as well. Exactly AI, as I've said before, is a LoRa, so it allows you to train on your own images, but it's, as I've said, there are companies that are doing things that are now really included in the large language models. This is a good example. Trip Planner AI is one of those. Will just tell us all about your trip, tell us about you, and it will then come up with a personalized thing. It's a little bit like an agentic AI. It knows how to book the cabs, it knows how to do your diary, it knows how to do the flights, and it knows what a good time is, essentially. Assume AI, this is all about empathetic voices. It's interesting how voices can either be used to mimic yours, or it can be used to guide yours if you want to go into a different mood state. But it can actually just generate all the differences between the voices because it understands it. Hugging Face, if you're a bit of a nerd, you want to go and have a play, that's where you go and play. It's the kind of the hangout zone for all the new models, usually open source. So if you are so inclined, you can have a bit of a dive into that and find new things out. More curious examples, this is creating music. I've already showed you this one. This is AI powered games using agents. So this little game, they just gave each one of these AIs its own plan. They said, like, hey, just make a game. The CEO said, right, okay, I need coders, I need designers, I need testers, I need documentation, I need marketing team, and it organized itself. It then wrote the code, it then created the graphics for it, and it did that all within 7 minutes, and it generated a game that was playable on a website. So if you've got a startup and you don't know quite how to do it, maybe you just set some agents going and see what they do. This is Emote. This is basically style transfer. So you can take an image and then you can then apply that to a video. We've seen quite a lot of this at the moment, deepfakes in other way. But this is also quite interesting. If you take an audio sample and then it can understand what might have been happening with that audio sample and regenerate, because it's been trained on lots of video of people communicating to each other. So just taking the audio, it can regenerate, or it can generate what the hand movements and the body movements might have been like. So really interesting for reanimating podcasts, for instance. This is the H. Jensen's. Obviously, this is a little bit of a piss take. However, this is completely created by one person in ChatGPT. And, it's got Midjourney, it's got Comfy UI, which is a way of chaining things together. And so it's using that sort of music generation, Midjourney images. It's then using Runway to then animate them, as I've said before. So you can see this, if one person can do this, we're getting to an interesting place. This is Niantic. This is the AR demo. But what's more interesting in this is not the fact that it's an AR demo using these QR codes, it's the fact that the QR code is not only an image, but it's also scannable as a QR code, and that's what AI can do. It can train on QR codes, know what one is, can make images in them as well. This is Brain GPT. I think we're getting towards the end now because they're getting a little bit bonkers, but this is a person thinking of a concept that's going in as a prompt to ChatGPT, and then it's actually trying to figure out what the answer is. So human thinking is like a fairy tale was filled with magical adventures and charming enchanted forest. ChatGPT thought you said a fairy tale had lots of magic, journey forest magic, not far off. So there might be a point where you have a brain cap on and you do all of your work through that. Words of wisdom, remember the sensible view. Customer experiences, improve productivity of your company, embrace the opportunity and thoughtful and responsible way. Use that. Hopefully there's some examples before. Use it as your co-pilot. It's not going away. This is not the metaverse. Sorry if you really sunk into the metaverse. AI is just another business tool. Other industries and competitors are using it. Ignore the hype. It can't do everything. So stay off LinkedIn because it's quite a scary place if you're into AI. Focus on your business needs. Think of it as your co-pilot, the super you. Your input is important, obviously. To define why and how to use AI, you need to do this as a company. Probably speaking a little bit, this is for a smaller company. Obviously with Comcast, you're already a long way down this one. To guide which models and platforms you use, let's use it to drive real business growth, and the ideas are key. Always end on a good quote, basically. Success is where prepared and opportunity meets. Bobby Unser, a racing driver. So what will you use AI for? If you like this sort of stuff, then do feel free to scan the QR code. I do this every Monday morning, not this long, obviously, but hopefully that was useful. Slightly breathless. Well done if you're still here, and I will see you on Thursday.